Bonjour, mon nom est Richard Schnerbach, président du Musée de Holocaust Montréal. Tonight, in partnership with colleagues and Jewish communities across the country, we commemorate Yom Hashoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Although this marks the second year in which we gather virtually, your presence here this evening is a powerful reminder of the importance of remembering the Holocaust. Honoring the memory of the 6 million and paying tribute to the survivors and their resilience. Tonight and forever, we remember the courage of those who defied the Nazis and maintained their humanity through spiritual, cultural, and armed resistance. It is our collective duty as Montrealers, as Jews, as Quebecers, as Canadians, and citizens of the world to remember the Shoah and transmit the painful lessons of the past to the future generations. In the face of rising anti-Semitism, racism, and hatred, as well as the Holocaust distortion and denial, tonight we come together to say, we remember. We remember the dangers of unchecked hatred. We remember our responsibility to help the oppressed, and we remember the lessons of the survivors, grandparents like mine, who bravely shared their stories of horror and pain, but also resilience and hope. Through remembrance, education, and action, there is hope that we can build a better future. Au nom du Musée de l'Holocauste Montréal, nous vous remercions de votre présence lors de cette commémoration de Yom Hashoah. We would especially like to thank our remarkable Yom Hashoah committee, co-chaired by Doris Stagg, Ruth Najman, and Esther Andor. This commemoration would not have been possible without the generosity of the Israeli Foundation at the Dim Family Foundation, to whom I express my sincere gratitude. We would also like to thank our dedicated supporters and partners, Federation CJA, the Newburgh Holocaust Education Center, the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada, the Atlantic Jewish Council, and the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. J'invite maintenant M. François Legault, Premier ministre du Québec, à nous dire quelques mots.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je veux d'abord remercier les dirigeants du Musée de l'Holocauste de Montréal pour leur invitation à cette journée du souvenir pour la Shoah et l'héroïsme. Merci d'avoir adapté votre événement au contexte sanitaire. Ça nous permet d'honorer notre devoir de mémoire malgré la pandémie. On ne doit jamais oublier les millions de victimes de l'Holocauste. On ne doit jamais oublier que le pire est possible si on baisse la garde devant la haine et l'intolérance. Les choses, évidemment, s'améliorent, mais malheureusement, on n'a pas réussi à éliminer toute la haine dans le monde. Mais on doit continuer de tendre la main à tous nos concitoyens de toutes les origines, de toutes les confessions. On doit continuer de se rassembler pour dénoncer la haine, pour combattre l'intolérance. C'est ce qu'on fait en continuant de nous rappeler les horreurs de l'Holocauste. Aujourd'hui, tout le Québec se souvient avec vous. Merci.
I want to begin by expressing my deepest gratitude to our survivors who lived through unspeakable horrors and yet were able to start new lives here in Montreal after the war. You are not only pillars of our community, but the very embodiment of resilience. Thank you. Merci. Toda. While we remember and mourn all those who lost their lives, it is imperative that we take whatever lessons we can from the millions of deaths, as well as honor our survivors. As we all search for signs of hope amid the pandemic, we take solace and wisdom from those who endured and survived a horrendous time in history. Bien que la crise que nous traversons actuellement ne se compare pas aux gestes horribles et délibérés de l'Holocauste, nous pouvons trouver l'inspiration et l'espoir dans nos survivants. During a time of great change and uncertainty, our survivors continue to and will always remain our beacons of hope. To all of our survivors, know that you are valued members of our community, and we are here to support you in any way we can for as long as this crisis lasts and beyond. À tous les survivants, sachez que vous êtes des membres précieux de notre communauté et que nous sommes là pour vous soutenir de notre mieux pendant toute la durée de cette crise, puis par la suite. It has been 76 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and the end of the Holocaust. We will never forget. Nous n'oublierons jamais. Merci et bonne soirée. Thank you.
My name is Ruth Nashman. Together with Doris Stagg, we are co-chairs of the Yom Hashoah Committee, and we are both daughters of survivors. Today, we gather virtually to honor the survivors and mourn the loss of 6 million Jews, of whom 1.5 million were children. This is a nationwide commemoration, thanks to the partnerships we established with Jewish institutions across the country. We will also hear from family members of survivors living in other parts of North America, and we welcome Jewish organizations from across Canada to join us in the commemoration. As we, the second generation, have raised our own children, we realize that our parents' stories of survival and loss affected the way we were brought up. Some of our parents were fearfully overprotective. Others may have been bolder. Some distanced themselves from their Jewish identity. Some became closer. Some never left a constant state of mourning. Some appeared to move on. Some shared their stories. Some tried to keep their past with them. However, we all felt that we were different from children whose parents were born in Canada. We grew up with small families. Most of us had no grandparents. We only had a few aunts and uncles and cousins. Our parents' friends were our surrogate family members. We always knew that there were memories hidden in the family. This legacy has influenced the way we see the world and the way we raised our children. The theme for tonight is transmission of the legacies and how these legacies are carried forward. Tonight, we will listen to the testimonies of 6 survivors. Their children and grandchildren, or members of the younger generation, will reflect on how their parents' Holocaust experiences have impacted them. We feel strength from knowing that the stories are surviving and continue to be told from generation to generation, midor ledor. This commemoration is dedicated to all these families. I now give the floor to Holocaust survivor Ursula Feist and her family.
My name is Ursula Feist. I was born in Berlin in the 20s. In May of 1939, I was one of those 10,000 lucky children the British saved by getting on a kinder transport in the nick of time. The war ended in May 1945, by which time I was married. On VE Day, people were flag-waving, dancing and kissing. My extended family and so many friends could not celebrate. They were dead. Their ashes buried in Auschwitz, Sobibor, Riga or Treblinka. I could not wave a flag. I could not sing along. I could not cry. I held my husband's hand. We had lost so much, but we were happy to have one another. I'm not full of revenge for something that happened so long ago, something I cannot change. I cannot afford to live in the past, although black memories often haunt me. Anti-Semitism is ugly, global and rising. Discrimination can only be eradicated by educating the young, starting in kindergarten, making them understand what is right and what is wrong. What has happened must never be allowed to happen again. It is up to the next generations to make sure it doesn't.
My name is Anthony Feist. I am the son of Ursula and David Feist. I have been asked for some reflections growing up as the child of a survivor. My parents, especially my father, made a conscious effort to erase most of their wartime experiences and pretty much all of their Jewish upbringing, although they were both raised in religious households. As children, for the most part, we weren't introduced to anything Jewish. We never had a bar mitzvah. Instead, we were sent to a humanist Sunday school. There were the occasional seders at homes of my parents' friends, but for me they didn't hold much meaning. My parents' indifference to religion had an effect on me. Growing up, I felt embarrassed and didn't want to admit to being Jewish. I just wanted to fit in. As a result, I became a cynic. Still am to some degree. Having attended 7 different schools in 9 years, and the last being a Baptist boarding school in Saint-Jean, Quebec, probably didn't help my Jewish upbringing very much. My wife and I were determined to give our sons a bilingual education in a multi-ethnic school. But to ensure a sense of Jewish identity, we decided to attend Saturday morning junior congregation services at the Shara Zedek. There, Sam, who led the junior congregation at the time, told stories, taught songs, and much more. My father actually mocked me when he found out. After my father died, I think my mother missed aspects of her Jewish heritage. She started talking to students about her wartime experiences. She found talking to students and answering their questions meaningful, and she worked tirelessly with the Holocaust Museum until the end of her life. I hope all survivors continue to share their experiences with their children and grandchildren. I think that the children of survivors are themselves survivors to some degree, and both them and their children have an important legacy to preserve. Today, I am grateful that we gave our boys some Jewish traditions: Shabbat candles on Friday night, bar mitzvah, Passover, seders, synagogue visits, just to mention a few things. And I hope this has meaning for them and their families.
Chers survivants et leurs familles, mesdames et messieurs, shalom. Nous sommes réunis ici virtuellement pour commémorer les 6 millions de victimes de l'un des plus grands génocides de l'humanité, la Shoah. The significance of this day, marked in Israel and in Canada, is to commemorate those who perished, the suffering of the survivors, and that we as humanity learn that hateful words, if not confronted, may lead to horrible acts. Nous venons de tous les milieux. Certains d'entre nous sont des survivants, d'autres sont les enfants, comme moi, et même les petits-enfants des survivants. D'autres encore sont des amis de la communauté juive. Peu importe nos origines, nous avons tous une chose en commun, le désir que ce genre de tragédie ne se reproduise jamais au monde entier. After realizing the horrors of the Holocaust, many believe that it would be the end of anti-Semitism. However, today, our children unfortunately face a world where anti-Semitism is still very present, especially on social media. but not limited to the virtual world. Just a few weeks ago, the Shar Shemaim synagogue here in Westmount was vandalized with swastikas. Il est de notre obligation de prendre les mesures appropriées pour éviter que les manifestations de l'antisémitisme ne se reproduisent au monde, et spécialement au Canada. Today, unlike 1939, the Jewish people are no longer defenseless nor alone when faced with anti-Semitism. We have Israel, a country for all the Jewish people, a country that will continue to share its experience and know-how with the world in the spirit of Tikkun Olam, a democratic country that will stand up in the defense of human rights for all. Que la mémoire des 6 millions qui nous ont été arrachés pendant l'époque la plus sombre de l'humanité soit bénie éternellement. Toda.
We remember the victims, we honor the survivors. Together we remember the legacy of the Holocaust.
Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah, respect aux survivants, ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
Wir gedenken der Opfer und trauern um die 6 Millionen ermordeten Juden. Wir verneigen uns in Demut vor den Überlebenden. Wir geloben, die Erinnerung an den Holocaust immer zu bewahren. Nie wieder. Das ist unsere Verantwortung.
Cześć ofiarom Shoah. Szacunek dla tych, którzy przeżyli. Razem zachowajmy pamięć o Holokauście.
Vi minns offren. Vi hedrar de överlevande. Och vi kommer aldrig att glömma förintelsen.
私たちは犠牲になられた方々のことを忘れず、生存された方々を称えます。私たちは共にホロコーストの遺産を記憶していきます。
Je m'appelle Gilbert Usan. Je suis né à Tunis en 1938. J'avais 5 ans quand la situation à Tunis a dramatiquement changé suite à l'invasion des troupes allemandes en novembre 1942 et l'occupation qui l'a suivi. Les Allemands ont rapidement pris le contrôle de la ville et mis en place un couvre-feu à la tombée de la nuit, ce qui leur permettait aussi de faire des rafles de quartier pour arrêter des Juifs et les envoyer aux travaux forcés. Je me souviens que de temps à autre, mon père, mis au courant d'une rafle possible dans notre quartier par un ami qu'il avait dans la police française, ne rentrait pas le soir à la maison. Il allait s'héberger pendant quelques jours chez des membres de la famille ou des amis non-juifs qui habitaient d'autres quartiers de la ville. Je ne savais pas bien sûr la vraie raison de son absence. Ma mère m'a toujours dit qu'il était parti pour son travail. Ma mère était souvent seule, inquiète et pleurait fréquemment. Je me souviens avoir toujours peur lorsque j'entendais la bruyante marche rythmée de la patrouille allemande traversant notre rue chaque nuit.
My name is Irit Uzan, and my father is Gilbert Uzan. Growing up, we never really discussed my father's experiences at his home during the Holocaust. I had a sense that as a young child, he would have had some memories of the German occupation, but I did not want to ask about them since he never mentioned them himself. When I reflect on his experiences during that time, it is clear to me that the effects of having lived through those had long-lasting implications on his own life. When I reflect on my father's memories at such a young age, and I look to my own children, it's difficult for me to imagine the stress and anxiety I would feel in trying to protect them under such circumstances. It gives me some perspective on the choices my father and mother made in raising us. In contrast to my father, while growing up in Montreal, we lived in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood, and my sister and I attended private Jewish day schools. We had very little interaction with non-Jews socially, and this limited or prevented entirely our potential exposure to any anti-Semitic episodes. As a parent, I have come to value the experience of having developed my own Jewish identity through the community in which I grew up. My kids now attend the local Jewish high school in Vancouver, and we prioritize celebrating the holidays, having Shabbat dinners, and taking trips to Israel above other secular activities. My father clearly held on to the memories of his mother's experiences in being left without her husband to care for the children alone long after this time. Throughout my childhood, I always sensed that he felt a certain duty to his mother his entire life. Even when he moved away from her, leaving her in Israel to come to Canada with his own family, he continued to keep track of her needs and to corral family members to participate in her care. In the end, she spent her last years with him in our family home in Montreal. I am grateful that by being in Tunisia during the war, it meant that my father's exposure to the atrocities of the Nazis was minimized both in length and severity. It meant that most of my family from his side went on to make Aliyah to Israel or live out their lives across Europe, and he continued to enjoy the luxury that many other Jewish families were denied. In my own life, I've always prioritized our relationships with our extended family as a means of honoring our heritage and passing this along to the next generation.
Hi, my name is John Lazar, and Gilbert Uzan is my grandfather. I'm 15 years old. When I heard the story that my grandfather told about his time during the Holocaust in Tunisia under Nazi occupation, I was very moved. I found it interesting how, since he was a child, he spoke French and he continues to speak French to this day, and how our family continues to speak French and learn French. And I think that it was interesting that I then learned to speak French, and my kids will probably learn to speak French. I also learned that his parents became much more strict and careful with their children during the occupation. It makes a lot of sense because they want to do everything they could to protect them. I learned as well that his neighbor, who was quite kind to his family prior to the occupation, turned slightly anti-Semitic and did not like his family that much anymore. And that it was interesting how a person who you could have deemed a friend could turn so differently and could change their opinions so much.
J'aimerais remercier le Musée de l'Holocauste d'offrir à nos violons, dans le cadre de cette commémoration, l'occasion d'exprimer toute notre émotion et répéter à l'unisson « Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah, respect aux survivants ». Ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste. This piece for violin and orchestra was performed by a Jewish prisoner on the night of Yom Kippur, in front of a packed crowd of murderer Nazi officials at Auschwitz. His name was Srebrenik. The story goes that he played the piece so passionately that the Nazi officials were amazed and asked him to play it 3 times.
My name is Lily Toth. I was born in Budapest in 1925 as an only child. The war started for us in 1944 when the Germans occupied Hungary. When the Aerocross came to empty our house, I ran off. I took off my yellow star and went over to the Buda side to see our neighbors who had 2 daughters who were my friends. They were hiding in an apartment there and I stayed with them. Someone must have informed on us because one day the Aerocross came. They took us to the shores of the Danube. We were tied in 2s by the wrist. I was tied to one of the girls and we managed to untie ourselves somehow. When they shot us, they must have shot my friend in the heart because she died immediately. I was shot in the arm, but I decided to fall to the ground with her, so they threw us both into the river. I managed to hold on to a boat, but when the Aerocross started shooting at it, I ducked under and swam away. I was a good swimmer, but the current was too strong, so I was washed ashore quite a distance down.
One of the things that I feel that we could learn from Lily is to appreciate life more. I feel that we truly think that every situation and negative thing that happens to us is the end of all beings. When realistically, when you take a look back at the stories of these Holocaust survivors, these are real tragedies. These are real issues. These are real life situations that I don't believe people in today's day would really be able to even fathom, let alone survive, let alone be able to persevere. So that's why it's important to me, Lily Toth's story, because it humbles me as a Jew and as a human being to understand that there are way worse circumstances out there. The most important thing is that we never forget our story. We never forget our history, and we always remain proud as Jews because we have been through persecution, we have been through negativity, and we have been put in situations that have been near eliminating. And from then forward, we should never try to forget, and we should always remember.
Lily Toth's harrowing story of survival during the Holocaust is a truly remarkable one. It is a story that really resonated with me personally, as my grandmother was also a survivor from Budapest, and I, like Lily, am an only child. I could only imagine how devastating it must have been for her to learn that her parents had been murdered by the Hungarian gendarmes who were Nazi collaborators. This left Lily, only a teenager at the time, an orphan, having to struggle to survive on her own in an atmosphere of terror. Lily's story, told with courage and dignity, shows us how one should never give up hope, even under the most seemingly hopeless of circumstances. Her story helps us understand how crucial it is for future generations of all backgrounds to learn about the Holocaust in order to never forget and to prevent such atrocities from ever happening again. Lily's story imparts the lesson that we must never stand by and ignore signs of oppression or injustice. This reinforces what fellow Holocaust survivor and renowned human rights activist Elie Wiesel once said: "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the oppressed. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented."
We remember the victims and we honor the survivors. Together we remember the legacy of the Holocaust.
Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah, respect aux survivants. Ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah, respect aux survivants. Ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah, respect aux survivants. Ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
We remember the victims, we honor the survivors. Ensemble, nous reconnaissons l'héritage tragique de l'Holocauste.
We remember the victims and we honor the survivors. Together we remember the legacy of the Holocaust.
Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah, respect aux survivants. Ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
We remember the victims and we honor the survivors. Together, we remember the legacy of the Holocaust.
We remember the victims and honor the survivors. Together, we remember the legacy of the Holocaust.
My name is Pinchas Blit. I was born in 1931 in Kotylis, Poland, a tiny village with about 50 Jewish families. In 1942, the village was completely destroyed and its population of about 3,000 were murdered. Somehow my family managed to escape, and we met other survivors. We moved deep into the forest and stayed there in hiding for 2 years. Structured with saplings and using ferns and pine branches as cover, we built huts to sleep in and protect ourselves from the bitter cold. Our main food was potatoes. This is all we had during the winter. In the summer, we also had mushrooms and blueberries. We lived in constant fear of being discovered by the Germans and by partisan groups, who ironically accused us of being German spies. On several occasions, we were very close to being killed by them.
He never really burdened us with his experience. It was never like guilting us with it, and he never kind of expressed it as a negative thing that haunted him. You know, he never made us feel haunted by it, his experience. And in a sense, looking back, he may have given us an understanding to appreciate life and have, you know, more of a joy for life.
Being the other, being the outsider, being persecuted, how that continues today. Obviously, I've made the question and the issue of human rights a big part of who I am, you know, personally and professionally. And I know that all of that links back to Dad's experience during the war, everything that he survived and struggled through. And I think about his story, even beyond the story of survival and coming to Canada and creating this new life for himself as an immigrant, right? Because his story is also the story of immigration and coming to a new place and facing a whole new set of challenges too. And I think that also just wraps up into these broader questions of rights and the obligations that governments have towards individuals, and the obligations that, you know, each of us has as individuals to make sure that the types of fear and persecution and hatred that was allowed to dominate in that period of life doesn't happen again.
I feel like after what our Zadie went through, we should already know and understand how horrible that can be. And I feel like, yes, we should protest and should help people who are going through some of the same things that the Jews went through during the Holocaust. I feel just very proud about it, that my grandfather went through the Holocaust. Even though he suffered so much, he just kept pushing through and survived. And it makes me want to do the same. It makes me want to have the same kind of courage that he had. It makes me feel lucky that there's not a war going around us and Jews aren't treated wrongly. It also makes me feel honored that my lady was in the Holocaust and survived. I also feel empathy because of the people who didn't survive the Holocaust.
In terms of second generation Holocaust survivor, I think we were in a way kind of protected because, again, his whole family survived intact, and because during those years of war, they weren't, at the mercy or the direct mercy of the Germans. They were hiding, but they weren't in a concentration camp. I do feel like I want my children to know who their grandparents were. I want them to know, what Zadie has gone through. And I want them to understand how important that is and how meaningful it is. And to just cherish it and know about it, not just through our stories, but also, as they grow up and learn about history. I just think, never forget.
Je m'appelle Muguette Myers. Je suis née en 1931 à Paris, en France. Quand la guerre a éclaté, le gouvernement français pensait que Paris allait être bombardé. Alors on nous a évacués avec l'école. Je ne savais pas où était maman et elle ne savait pas où j'étais. À l'âge de 7 ans, ça me semblait une éternité, bien que ce doit être plus que quelques semaines. Avec maman, nous sommes allés à Chanlot, un tout petit village de 150 habitants au sud-est de Paris. Tout le monde savait que nous étions juifs, même les enfants, mais personne n'y prêtait attention. J'allais à l'école comme tous les autres enfants. J'ai appris la religion catholique, je suis allée à la messe, au catéchisme. Un jour, monsieur le curé est venu nous voir et il a dit à maman « Vous savez, Madame Bella, Speiser, c'est trop étranger. Il faut que vous changiez de nom. » C'est comme ça que je suis devenue Marie-Bella. Un ami m'a raconté qu'il allait chez monsieur le maire pour l'aider et il voyait monsieur le maire assis et il y avait des lettres de dénonciation et il les jetait dans la cheminée. Je ne sais pas d'où elles venaient, peut-être des fermes aux alentours. Je dois dire que pendant la guerre, je n'avais pas peur quand j'étais avec maman parce qu'elle était très forte de caractère et c'était elle qui s'occupait de tout.
My name is Arlene Myers-Gorn. I'm the daughter of Muguette Speiser and Philip Myers. My mother was a hidden child during the war. She immigrated to Canada with her brother and their mother, my grandmother, in 1946. My mother didn't have many relatives left after the war, so she instilled in us that all our relatives were precious. My mother would share her wartime experiences with me and my brother at a very young age. They were our bedtime stories. Her mother, my grandmother, was a very strong and resourceful woman, and this is what helped her and her 2 children survive the war. She taught my mother to be resilient, and my mother in turn instilled resilience in my brother and me. I don't think my mother ever imagined I would marry a modern Orthodox man and adopt a completely different lifestyle than the one I grew up in. I started following the laws of Kashrut and observing Shabbos. I knew I could do it because I learned from my mother that we could do anything we set our mind to. My mother always loved to read, but during the war, she couldn't have her own books. She swore when she grew up, she would buy the books she wanted so she could read and keep them. Her house is full of books, and she introduced us children to the wonderful world of reading. Though my mother and I are very different personalities, there is so much I have learned from her and continue to learn every day.
We remember the victims and we honor the survivors. Together we remember the legacy of the Holocaust.
Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah. Respect aux survivants. Ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
Pamiętamy o ofiarach i szanujemy ocalałych. Razem wspominamy dziedzictwo Holokaustu.
Wir gedenken die von uns, was wir haben verloren im Shoah. Zu die, was haben es übergelebt, zu sie kommt unser Covid. Unser Jerusha ist ständig zu gedenken und nicht lassen die Welt vergessen.
Hommage aux victimes de la Shoah, respect aux survivants, ensemble préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
We remember the victims, we honor the survivors. Together, we remember the legacy of the Holocaust.
My name is Leo Kliot. I was born in 1929 in Vilna, Lithuania. When the war broke out, I was 10 years old. In 1941, the city was occupied by the Germans. The Lithuanian collaborators started taking able-bodied men to do forced labor. My father was one of them. We never saw him again. After the war, we found out they were taken out to the forest and shot. We were forced to move into the ghetto. We had to share one room with 11 people. We had very little food and were always hungry. Many people were taken out of the ghetto to work. One day in 1943, while we were at work, we got a note from my sister. She lived outside the ghetto as a Christian. The note implied that we shouldn't return to the ghetto. So we decided not to go back. As it turned out, the ghetto was liquidated the next day. We went to some Christian friends who hid us for a month. My sister found us a farm outside Vilna. The farmer happened to be a Nazi sympathizer. He was a cruel and mean man who made us work very hard. We were there for about 1 year.
My name is Talia Kliod, and I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. While I unfortunately was not able to hear my bubby's account firsthand, ever since I was little, my Zadie would tell me stories about the war and his youth. When I was really young, he would tell me about the dreams he had that saved his life and the horses he used to care for when he was working on the farm. As I got older and learned the painful details, I began to understand why every Friday night dinner we share together is so important to my Zadie, and they have become that important to me as well. He is truly a pillar of strength and the definition of resilience. Though he has been through hell, he always remains positive and managed to build a beautiful life and family. For his grandchildren, and now great-grandchild, Zadie's loving and positive attitude instills a strong connection to our family, heritage, and tradition. This is something I'm sure will be passed on from generation to generation, along with the stories of survival that will never be forgotten.
Growing up, my grandfather Leo was always willing to share his stories about his life during the Holocaust. It was never something he shied away from. As I got older and began to understand the magnitude of his past, I recognized that if he hadn't been so lucky, I wouldn't be alive. That is something that sticks with me to this day. Despite the hardships he went through during the war, he was able to survive and begin a new life in Canada. He built a successful business and started a beautiful family, which he adores to this day. That my Zeta was able to completely reroute his life has always impressed me. In that way, he taught me about the resilience of the human spirit. No matter what life throws at me, I know that I can endure it as long as I keep trying and don't give up hope. Another major part of Leo's legacy that I've adopted is the importance of family and sharing experiences with your loved ones. My Zeta's happiest moments revolve around spending time with his family, wherever that may be. Getting together always brings a smile to his face. And he is so generous with all of us. Whenever I ask him for anything, he provides it to me without hesitation. Eventually, when I have grandkids of my own, I will try my best to treat them just as my Zeta treats me, with unconditional love and kindness. Zeta, you are the heartbeat of our family, and we appreciate everything you do for us just by being who you are. We love you.
We light these 6 candles to commemorate the 6 million lives lost in the Holocaust and remembered today.
Nous nous souvenons des victimes et nous rendons hommage aux survivants.
Ensemble, préservons la mémoire de l'Holocauste.
We remember the victims.
Et nous honorons les survivants.
Вместе мы храним память о Холокосте.
Respect aux survivants.
Miasim bahpanenk holocausti ishadaga.
Tudiri kananan haiju.
Araha mishay tarariyat girigoju.
Holocaust merasan unutmayınız.
שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים את נשמות ששבת מיליוני אחינו ואחיותינו בני ישראל הקדושים שנהרגו ושנשרפו ושנשחטו ושנקברו חיים על קידוש השם. ביד הנאצים ועוזריהם ימח שמם, ביערות ובגטאות ובמחנות, בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם בגן עדן. תהי מנוחתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, וייצר אור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוח בשלום על משכבם, ונאמר אמן.
Please join me in reciting the communal Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, b'yoma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael, באה גלה וזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מכל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעולמה ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.